In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at part of this NISO camera done in Plasticity. I decided to download Plasticity and take a stab at learning it. So I've only been using it for about a day and a half or 2 days, but I'm getting a swing for their methodologies. A lot of Nurbs modelers use very similar methodologies, but Plasticity has their own take on things. And since it's sort of all the rage right now, I figured I would go ahead and show you how we would approach modeling something like this in Plasticity. I'm going to assume that a lot of people are here just to kind of get a sense for what Plasticity is doing. So I'm going to go kind of slow, and I'm also pretty new to their way of manipulating the view, so I'm probably going to screw up here and there. So I'm just going to take everything and remove it. A lot of things are very Blender-like, and we'll take a look at that along with some things that are kind of different. I want to come into the front view, and it has a trident, much like Blender does, where you click to come into the front view. And what I'm wanting to do is start off with a very simple primitive in a way that we would do it like in Blender. So I'm going to come over to the center rectangle. Now let's talk about this for just a second. Over here are a bunch of creation tools, but there are also some editing tools. And I don't fully get what their logic is behind why some tools are here and some tools are over there. We'll kind of take a look at that as they come up. But I'm going to come to the center origin, click, and then pull this out, and you'll notice that it's got readout values. And I want to put in specific values that are going to match my Blender model. So I'm going to press Tab and note that that will give me access to typing in specific values at the top. So I'm going to pop over to Blender, and we're going to take a look at the values for this. So I want right off the bat the longest value, which is X. So I'm just going to copy that from Blender, come back over to Plasticity. I have to hit Tab again, and then I can just punch in those values, and then I can hit Tab again. We'll just pop back over to Blender and then copy the next set of values over. Okay, so there I go, and I just hit return, and I'm going to hit return again, and that will validate and create the starting geometry. So that matches my Blender file size. So the first thing that you're going to note is right over here in the left side, it shows all your objects. And Plasticity has 3 data types. It has curves, it has what they call sheets, and then it has solids. And it'll just show you what you have, and it won't show anything else if you don't have any of those. So I want to come over here and create a solid out of this. And right now, if you come up and look at this, these are the selection modes. We have object mode, face, edge, and vertex, which is very similar to Blender. And I'm going to press the E key to extrude it much like you would in Blender. And I'm going to start moving it. And then I'm just going to come down to distance and type in 0.211, which will match the value that I have in Blender. And I hit OK or Enter, and there we go. So now you can see we have some sheets and we have curves. These perimeter edges are no longer necessary. So let's go ahead and just delete those like we would in Blender by pressing the X key. So we have a sheet now. A sheet is just a collection of Nurbs surfaces that are bound together at the edges, but they're an open volume. They're not closed, which would be a solid. So that's why it says sheets here. But I want it to be closed. So we would select it in object mode, the entire thing. Come down here, there are a bunch of icons. I don't think their icons are fully developed yet. They sometimes don't really communicate what they do, but there's one down here that says patch holes along edges or create patch from curves. And what it does is it intelligently looks at what you have selected and closes off and caps off any open volumes if they're planar. So I'm going to call this face plate 1. And we're in object mode, but now we want to gain access to the edges, so we're going to switch to edge mode. And I'm going to select this edge, and then let me move up, pan up. I'm holding the Shift key to add that edge, so we have 2 edges selected. And anytime you have edges selected, this little widget shows up. And it does something kind of interesting, is that it allows you to just grab it, and you can immediately begin creating a fillet on the surface. So you don't need to go and find a separate tool to invoke fillets. In fact, let me kind of zoom out and then move in. And the cool thing about the way that it works is that depending on the direction you go, it creates a chamfer, or in the opposite direction, it creates a fillet. So I think that's about good. I'm not going to try and match my model in Blender exactly. And you hit return, and then that validates that operation. The next thing that we want to do is add the fillet that comes around the perimeter. So again, we're in edge mode. If I select single edge, we've got a loop that appears. The way you select that loop is by holding the Option-Alt key and clicking, and then it will select the entire loop around it. So let's just zoom in a little bit. And then I'm going to grab the little widget and I'm just going to pull it till we get about like that. There we go. So that was really easy. Let's click OK, pull back out. And now we need to move it into position. Now I need to create space for the center body. I'm going to jump over to Blender and get the size of this. It's 1.43 inches. So now I want to switch over into top view. Specifically, we need to come back into that. And then we'll invoke the line function, come to the corner and snap it to that corner and then begin pulling up. Press the tab key and then type in the value 1.43, enter once and enter twice to invoke that. Now the thing to remember, this was a little bit confusing to me at first. In order to select curves, you have to be in edge selection mode. If you're exclusively in face mode, you can't select curves. It expects curves to be selected in edge mode. But what's interesting is that if you hold the Shift key, you can enable multiple selection modes at the same time. What I want to do is move both of these. And since I have both modes selected, I'm going to hold the Shift key and select this faceplate. So in order to move it, both of them, we press the G key just like we do in Blender. But we get a bunch of options down in the corner, and one of them is freestyle. So if we tap the F key, I can come over and it'll snap to the midpoint, and then I can just move this until it snaps to the center line of our 3D universe right there. And then let me just pan over. Now we just need to mirror this. So I'm going to select this. We come down here to one of the mirror tools. So these tools over here, as best I can guess, I haven't read about them, I've just been using them, is that these are sort of global functions that are pretty much always available. Options that appear over here are options that are based off what can be done to a particular selection that you have. And these are more functions to create new objects, with a couple of exceptions like the trim tool. I don't know why the trim tool is over there and not down here. I don't know. But we want to mirror this, so let's come down here to mirror, and it kind of intelligently figures out that you may want to be mirroring on this center line along the y-axis. So click over here and it puts the mirror over there. The application does seem to detect and make intelligent decisions about kind of what you're intending. This is a good example of that. So we need to create the central body now. Let's hit return to validate this tool. Click OK right there. We need to extract some geometry in order to create that. So let's rotate this around. And what I'm going to do, in fact, I can remove this edge up here. So press the X key to delete that. So we've only got two solids at this point. In fact, I've got faceplate 1 and I've got faceplate 2. I'm going to switch exclusively over into edge mode so that we're not kind of constantly over selecting things. Let's back out just a little bit. You can see I can select that edge, but I also want to get the loop chain going down. So I'm going to hold the Option key, select that, hold the Shift key while I'm holding the Option-Alt key, and I can select those over there. And just like in Blender, I can duplicate those by pressing Shift and D, and it's created two curves from those edge selections. Now we want to operate on just those edges. I'm going to in this outliner area, I'm going to turn off just temporarily those two solids so that we can operate just on these. But we need to loft these together to create a surface to work with. Since we're in edge mode, I can hold the Shift key and select both of those. And then there's actually a loft function, which is the L key. You press that and it creates a sheet between them. But I actually want to do something a little bit more sophisticated with this because I want to gain access to this surface, and it's creating a single sheet. So I'm actually going to undo. Let's deselect, and we're going to switch over here to the trim tool. But in order to know what to trim, I want to switch over into point mode, and that's going to give me a visual indication of where my segments are on the curve. And then I can come over with the trim tool, and I'm going to delete those segments. So I'm going to click OK to validate that last operation, and I'm going to switch back over just exclusively into edge mode. Select this edge and this edge, L key to loft, hit return, and we're going to do the same thing down here. Hold the Shift key, L key to loft, and enter. And then I can select this edge. Because we're in edge mode, it sees this sheet, and that is an edge on that sheet. I can hold the Shift key to select this, and then L key lofts between those. Hit return. Our goal is to create a solid out of this. Let's come over here and remove these curves, X key. Now I'm going to select this edge and hold the Shift key and select this edge, and then we're just going to loft again. But notice what it does. It's trying to create a smooth flowing curve down here, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to go down to continuity G0. Now let's talk about this for a second. In the world of Nurbs and CAD, continuity is a really big thing. And in fact, it's a big thing for subdivision surfaces too. And there are different degrees of what's called continuity. And that means how smoothly a curving surface comes off of a flat surface or transitions into another surface, how smooth that curvature and blending is. And G0 is linear. It's no curvature, no smoothness. It's a hard boundary. Whereas G1 is basically the default. Let me move this over. And G2 is the smoothest. Okay, so we're going to go to G0, hit return. Now we need to merge all of these into a single sheet. So this is where we go back into selection mode of object. Select this, hold the Shift key, and select each of these 4 sheets. And then we come down to a little operation down here called join curves or sheets. That joins them into a single unit. And now Plasticity will be able to detect that it's got these planar open regions. And we come down to a function called patch holes, and it will create a solid out of those. And now you can see it's moved this object up into the solids list. So if we come back over and turn on these 2 side components, we can see those right there. But let me turn them back off because we're just going to continue to work on this central body. And we want to come over and add the eyepiece over here. Now, Plasticity has functionality that Blender doesn't have that we're going to look at next, having to do with construction grids. Some 3D applications have a grid-centric mechanism for controlling the creation of objects, and Blender is an oddball in this sense in that it does everything in screen space. So what I want to do is create a reference to this surface, and this is partially why I reconstructed this surface the way that I did. So we come into face mode now. I can select just this face, and if I press Shift Spacebar, watch what happens. It reorients and creates a grid based off that face. Come down to the cylinder tool and come right to this mid-intersection point. Click, drag, and then pull out to create that cylinder. Now this is where I think their user interface is not as worked out as it needs to be, because something is about to happen right here. If I click OK, you're going to note that it selected this entire thing. It integrated this cylinder into this object, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted that to be a separate object. So let's undo and try that again, and let me show you what's happening. Click, because I had selected that face, right? It's thinking that I may be creating some geometry that we want to have integrated into this object. So let's pull it back out. And it's saying select target bodies to cut or join into. Their type is really light, and it's sometimes hard to read. I think that's a UI deficiency on their part. But what we need to do to prevent that integration from happening is click the X right here, and then it no longer thinks we're trying to tie this cylinder directly into this object. And when we click OK, it becomes its own object, and that's what we want in this case. So let's come up here and click X, and it will return back to the standard default grid. Press the G key, and then we can take this and move it independently. And I want it to intersect because we're going to Boolean these two together. So I'm going to click OK to validate the move operation. And then we're in object selection mode, or what they call body selection mode. I'm calling it object. Hold the Shift key to select both of these components, and then we come down to the Boolean operation, which is Q. The default is to do a subtraction. They're calling it difference. We want a union, and there we go. So it's got these prompts of conditions that it wants met or options that you can meet to perform certain operations. That's what these are right here. But we've just gotten a basic union. Click OK, and there we go. And now we're going to zoom in around this area, and we're going to select this intersection edge because remember, this is now a volume, and we want to do some more operations to that. So we have to switch back over to edge mode. I can select this, hold the Shift key, and select that. And there we have that widget point at the last click point. Click and hold, and then we can perform a fillet very easily. This is the kind of thing that Nurbs and CAD is incredibly good at. There are other things that polygons are better at. This happens to be one thing that Nurbs is just really, really good at. Click OK. Now let's pull out, and we want to perform an operation on the other side of the faceplate. So let's do this. Let's take this, and I'm going to call this center body, and I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn back on the faceplate on the opposite side over here. In fact, actually I'm going to turn center body back on because I need to gain access to sort of the center. So let's do this again. I want to create a condition where I can create a circular path on this face. So if I switch back over into face mode, I can select that, press Shift Spacebar, and it creates our construction plane based on the orientation of that face. So let's come over now to our center circle, and it automatically detects the center. So let's draw it so it kind of overshoots just a little bit like that. Hit return. And if we want, we can move it up. So I could press the G key and then move that just a little bit and hit return to validate the operation. Plasticity is going to be pretty intelligent in figuring out that if you have overlapping elements, that may mean that you have regions like this that can be selected and operated on. But I really only want to kind of operate just on this one right here. I'd really like to maybe just cut a little bit more off about the center. So let's use the line tool. I'll click on this face, just go straight down, and it'll sort of snap, hit return. And now this edge right here, this intersecting line, will also sort of factor into that. But I'm going to switch over here to the trim tool, and I'm just going to have us trim off. By the presence of that intersecting line, it's going to detect with the trim tool that maybe we can trim that part off. Well, that's pretty cool because the blue means that there's still a face right there that we could operate on. Remember, once you've clicked it, there's still the primary operation that needs to be okayed over there. Let's also come over here and turn off the construction grid. I'm going to select this face. We have the widget, which will allow me to extrude that over. And I'm just going to take it about that far. Hit return. Let's go ahead and select in edge mode. I'm going to select this edge. That was a construction edge. X key deletes that. And then we're going to come up to the face plate and turn that off, and the center body, we're going to turn that off. We need to operate on this. We want to have sort of the rounded area over here, and so we need to construct that. But we have a solid right now, and we need to convert it from a solid into just the open sheets. So in body mode, object mode, select that. And then down here, there's a command called unjoin curves or sheets, and it converts these into a series of just sheets. So that will allow me to X key delete that, and this face right here, X key delete that. I want to select this edge, which is an edge of just that sheet, but we want to duplicate it. So Shift and D, it duplicates that. Let's do this. Let's come back over into the line tool. I want to be in the front view for that. And as we move down, it's going to detect certain aspects of the curve, like the midpoint. Click and then draw that out like that and hit return. What that will do is allow us to trim part of it off. So here again, we can come over to the trim tool and you just click there. And in fact, we can even just remove that at the same time and hit return. So now we just have half of that, but we need to create 180-degree curve circular form that comes around. Let's come back into the front view and come back over to our circle primitives, and there's one here called center point arc. So I'm going to come to the center here, click, and then we need to come to the top, click again, and just pull out an arc that comes around until we get right to there. Click. But when we rotate, we notice that it's kind of off. And here again, what we're about to do is going to be something sort of governed by these construction grids in a way that Blender really doesn't operate too much. So I want to move it. I can press the G key, and I can move it much like we do in Blender, but we want these endpoints to snap to this location. If I press the G key again, if you know in the options in the bottom right hand, there's one called Freestyle, F, and then I can click an endpoint and move it, but you notice that it doesn't take it. It snaps back. And what's happening is the construction grid doesn't want to let go of the object, kind of if you want to think about it that way. So we're going to come over here and cycle through the grids, the construction grids, until we get to the one that the object can move along. Okay, so if I press the G again, now the object can move along this construction grid. And if I press the F key again, then I can select this endpoint and snap it right there, and it'll take. So this is going to be foreign to you if you're not used to working with construction grids. I'm going to select this arc, which is what we want to lay the round. There's actually a sweep function. Click that, and the green check mark means we've satisfied one of the conditions, which is to select what it is that we want to do this sweep function with. But now we need to select a spine to guide it, and that's what that is. And there we go. Very easy. Okay, so click OK, and then I think I want to get rid of these, so I'll select these. These are just the construction splines that are spines that we've been using, and we need to join these together. So we've still got this end cap here, which means we need to be in this body mode. So we have these three separate, I'm holding the shift key, bodies, and these need to get joined together. So we come down here where it says join curves or sheets, which is the J key. And then we need to turn this back into a solid. So it's got this planar open face area. So this is where we would come back down here to this icon, patch holes, and there we go. So now we've converted that back into a solid. I don't need to name it. I'm going to turn back on this faceplate right here. You can see they're intersecting. Now we can join them together. We're in body mode. I'm going to hold the shift key, select both of them, come down to the Boolean function, go into union mode. That's all we need to do. Click OK. Look at that. The only thing we have left to do now is just to produce a fillet around this perimeter. Let's come over into edge mode, and I'm just going to hold the Option Alt key down and click, and it will select that loop, which is really nice. Let's zoom in a little bit, and then we just grab this little widget and pull it out, and there we have our hit return, and there we go. How easy was that? So let's zoom out a little bit and turn our other components back on. That's as far as I'm going to go with this model, but I kind of just wanted to show you how this would get constructed.